You're listening to The 14th Source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses. In the episode for Friday, January 14th, 2022. And I'm just going to, I want to be selfish here at the beginning, Andrew, because as you know, and as our dear listeners know, I am working my way through Star Trek, The Next Generation.
Star Trek's colon.
Star Trek's colon. You added the possessive, sir. I did not, because I respect the franchise.
You respect the Star Trek colon.
As you should. In space, no one can hear you. Toot. We're working our way through season 3 right now. We're kind of coming up onto the end here. And not only did they change the costumes away from the weird stretchy pants of the first two seasons, but this is the season where Ronald Moore shows up as a writer. Mm-hmm. And I think all these things combined, like it's been episodes, like I've been clear here saying, like, even especially at seasons 1 and 2, I'm like, this is an amazing show, fuck all the haters. But like season 3, yes, there is a noticeable leap in terms of just quality and just power of the narrative here. And so, like, Andrew, I'm just coming here, I just want to start by going, like, season 3 is amazing. Season 3 is amazing. And we're not even done with it yet, and I know how season 3 ends.
Right. No, there's a reason the show really, like, it had an audience, especially for a show in syndication where you really couldn't count on when it would be on. Every town, right. every city, a different station, a different time. It was definitely a show that I know by the end of by season 7, it was the kind of show where a lot of people just talked about it. It was a thing that, oh yeah, I watched that.
The one thing I know is that I think I need to actually accelerate my watching, because I know some of the streaming services that the owner of Star Trek, CBS, has signed streaming licenses with are expiring. Mm-hmm. They took Next Generation, as well as I forget which other series were streaming on Amazon Prime. Streaming for free, I should say. Those have gone. I'm like, it's only a matter of time with Netflix, which is where I'm watching, because I don't have Paramount Plus.
Right.
And I don't particularly want it, but I got a feeling.
Well, but I will say, there's a point where it's not bad for just all the Star Trek alone.
Right. And so, even though I'm excited with what the future brings, literally and narratively, within the story, there's also an anticipation, a sadness, because I know at some point, I'm less upset with the fact that it'll be pulled off of Netflix, but then whenever we go to the other service to continue watching it, there's going to be that moment of like, oh shit, where did we leave off?
Well, and yeah, that is definitely, so my best example of that is, I think I've talked about this before, I was watching the show 24, and I was on season 6 or 7, I forget what it was. So I knew what season I was on, but it got pulled from whatever I was watching it on. Right. And when I tried to go to the other show, I don't know, if you don't know, 24's episodes were literally just an hour slot. It was like 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And I was like, I do not know which hour I was on, and I didn't like fucking write it down. So I was like, right. I guess I'm never going to finish this season, because I don't want to watch 3 of the same hour, or I don't want to, it was, at least with Star Trek, you can kind of be like, oh yeah, okay.
That's true.
They have kind of some titles that stand out. You can be like, oh, okay, we recognize that,
And honestly, by the point they pull it, by the time we get to like season 5 or 6 or 7, apparently they have their shit together where it's to the point where, oh, if we happen to rewatch an episode, that's okay.
Right.
Because it's good. But I should say, aside from obvious missteps that every show has in its first couple seasons, I genuinely think every episode I've watched of The Next Generation has been good, or has very good parts or qualities to every single episode. I wouldn't say there's been an absolute dud. Except, you know what? A lot of people love Q. I could do without him. Although the last Q episode I saw was when he got exiled from the Q Continuum. Mm-hmm. And that was pretty great, because fuck that guy.
Yeah, he's got some good ones, and he's got some that are you could pass. It's actually, there's, this is not a Star Trek episode, but like it is, we could talk about this.
We could. That was fine. Man.
But what's interesting
we're just two friends hanging out.
What is interesting is that's a character where I would say some of his episodes are actually really good. And some of them, you really, they're forgettable. You could pass on them. But I'm shocked because some of them are like, not problematic, but is the troubles it has. The pilot was a Q episode, right?
It was. It's really shocking in that regard.
The series finale is a Q episode, and I think done well.
God. Okay.
And season 6 has a really strong Q episode,
right?
So like it is kind of like sometimes they're like, oh good, and sometimes they're like, oh, okay,
right. I just don't. I mean, I know I'm not watching Discovery, but I'm a nerd. I see what's in the news and stuff like that. I'm really not digging what they're doing with Q recently.
Well, that's Picard, so there you go.
No. Oh, okay. Well, so it's Picard where they're talking about, I don't know what it's called. Like he's trying to be anonymous, and he's like trying to say that that Hollywood is run by pedophiles and Democrats. I'm just trying to figure out.
Oh no, that's not Star Trek.
Oh, that's not Star Trek.
That's the real world.
Oh.
So you made a discovery there.
Star Trek Discovery. So
real world discovery. Yeah.
Well, speaking of streaming services, dear listeners, we are finally going to talk about something that you were interested in a month ago.
Yeah. So yes, so we're going to talk about, finally, only 3 or 4 weeks after the fact, the Disney Plus Marvel television show, Hawkeye. This is interesting, I think, because this may constitute the first time we've talked about a Marvel TV show with just the two of us.
That's true.
That we've both watched.
That is also true.
So here we go. This is it's in the past year. This is a first.
There we go. This is what 2022, bringing lots of firsts.
Yeah.
Before we get too far into this, I would like to say that we're going to be discussing Hawkeye and all of its facets. So starting now, there will be spoilers for the show. We'll be talking about this in just a bit, but I want to get out ahead of that before spoilers start dropping. So you've been warned. This episode will contain spoilers for the Disney Plus show, Hawkeye.
So Hawkeye, just ended, like I said, it was 4 weeks ago. So really it was the, November, December of 2021. And This is the Disney Plus show that features, obviously, aptly named Hawkeye, the character, as played by Jeremy Renner.
Mm-hmm. As Clint Barton, yeah.
As Clint Barton, the aforementioned Hawkeye. And other people played by other actors whose names I don't remember.
And introducing Haley Steinfeld as Kate Bishop, who later takes on the mantle of Hawkeye in the comics. Vera Farmiga as her mother. Let's see, who else?
Vince D'Onofrio in a surprise guest star.
You're jumping spoilers, by the way, in case you haven't seen the show. But like I said, we're a month behind, so I guess that spoiler tag is not really warranted. Yeah, it's a show that does a lot of things. And I would say, actually, not to kind of kick off the discussion, I think of the Marvel shows I've seen, and I should say the only ones I haven't seen have been Loki, and I've only watched, I think, the first half of What If. But it feels like the most fully realized show for me as a person coming to these shows as not a big Marvel stan, so to speak. So as kind of like a guy that...
he's in another show.
Stan, yes, yeah. Sebastian Stan is in it. Yeah, he was in... Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. My mistake. For me, as a person that's kind of on the outside, not really, this one, despite the fact that WandaVision brought in the Quicksilver from the Fox movies, which was a big point in its favor, this show was incredibly... The word I can't get away from is comfortable. I was like, it felt, if it was really focused, it was really clear, it was really fun. Mm-hmm. And I think mostly it comes down to the casting. And what I mean by that is just the quote unquote chemistry that all the cast had with each other. It was dynamic and interesting, and it was clear that they were having fun while also telling a really focused story. Mm-hmm. That's my quick review. This isn't a review show, but that's kind of my 2 cents coming off of it after finishing it this weekend. It's my favorite Marvel Disney Plus show.
I think what I would say is that just for those that don't know, right? We have WandaVision, we have Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we have Loki, we have What If, and now we have Hawkeye. So it's 5 shows. I think they were, probably it was supposed to be like maybe 2 shows and 3 shows or so, right?
Right.
They didn't. I don't think they intended to jam 5 shows into 1 year, but pandemic.
Right. It's actually interesting, like especially after 2020. 2021, actually, if you count the Disney Plus shows, was a very packed year for Marvel, even though it didn't feel like it in its own way. But yeah,
well, to a certain extent, it was almost like they were jamming a show every week, right? So I would say what I like, and I want to comment on is that this show is thematically, or kind of the way it's done. It feels like it's clearly a Marvel thing. There's no doubt that this is a Marvel show or Marvel movie, whatever, Marvel story. But it felt different than the other ones. It was, sure, it had some action and some whatever, but, it had some fun. It had some lighthearted, it was, whatever. A lot of people want to say it was like the Christmas action movie. It was almost like the Die Hard of the MCU.
Right. Yeah. It was the Shane Black series, basically.
I really enjoyed it. And the reason why I kind of say that like weirdly, like I'm surprised is, look, man, I don't think I could have disliked Hawkeye more, given what he's been in the MCU, which is very little. He's
the least impressive Avenger.
And I would say up until this, I was going to say, Jeremy Renner's the least impressive person they've ever cast, right? Like, but yet I watched this, I was like, wow, this is a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And he, he was part of that. Like, it wasn't like despite him, I think
was good.
He actually did well with, sure, he was kind of a curmudgeon a lot, but that worked, right? That's kind of what the show was. Yeah. And then, the new characters they introduced, once again, a new character, Kate Bishop is played by person.
Haley Steinfeld, yeah.
Who I was just like, oh, wow, okay, so when is she in the next thing? A lot of fun with that. And then, having other characters that kind of, that are going to show up later, or, the new character they showed up, Echo, I believe her name is, right? Who they've already announced has her own show, which is weird when you start, 'cause you're like, why does this villainous character have her own show? Like, well, she's going to have a turnaround, And to have, Florence Pugh come back as Yelena, which was, I mean, that, like, I don't know why she doesn't have all the shows, because, like,
right.
That's a character and actress that to me just commands every scene she's in.
Right. It's also because she's not getting her own show because she's busy starring in like Oscar nominated movies beforehand. So like she's got a career and shit.
This is her like fun side job. Or whatever.
I mean, same thing with Haley Steinfeld. Like this is a show with an exquisite cast, honestly.
I mean, I guess Vince D'Onofrio has gotten his fair share of accolades.
Yeah, but I think one of the things to go off of the point that you're making is that this is a Marvel show without superpowers.
Yes. Well, I mean, other than, they're really good at what they do to the point where it's a superpower. But
right, flicking quarters like a boss, right?
But no like super serums, no super suits. The best they can get is stealing Pym arrows or whatever.
Right, and Kingpin really being good at throwing people around.
Oh, I mean, well, Kingpin's always been that guy who's like, he's technically like, it's not a superpower, but sure acts like one.
Right. He's just really good at Aikido. But in that sense, it's really, and this is verified by the casting, it feels in a lot of ways like the spiritual successor, and honestly, the optimistic or more Disney-based successor to those Netflix Marvel shows.
Right.
The street level superhero, but not nearly as dire as all of those shows were.
And that's actually a really good point. And I mentioned Vince D'Onofrio as the Kingpin. They even said it's the same character,
same one, yeah.
But it is one that this is it's this feeling of this is the more family friendly issue that he shows up in, as opposed to if you read those Daredevil comics, i.e. shows, those are the ones you don't let your kids read.
Right. He didn't at any point, in case you haven't seen it, he didn't at any point during Hawkeye kill someone by slamming their head in a car door.
Right.
15,000 times.
Yeah. There was and he even had a much more jolly costume, which someone pointed out is in fact a legitimate Kingpin costume. They didn't make it up. That is, a Hawaiian shirt, white suit combo is a thing that Kingpin wears. Yeah. And it felt right. Like, it felt like this was, everything about this street level, like, yeah, sure. When, Hawkeye had a couple bad years and he went and did some stuff that involved, like, basically street thugs.
Yeah.
And that happened to run afoul of this guy who basically runs lots of street thugs. So yeah, I mean, when I saw the trailers, I was like, oh, this looks fun. But I will say I'm shocked at how much I enjoyed it. Again, just because I kind of expected Jeremy Renner to disappoint me. I guess I'm sorry, Jeremy Renner, for expecting you to suck.
That's the thing. I mean, like Jeremy Renner of the Avengers, I should say, with the exception of maybe ScarJo, he really comes from like Oscar bait, serious drama kind of background. Like he was in the Hurt Locker, right? And like that's all kinds of Oscar nominations. I don't know if he won anything. And I remember hearing when he was cast as Hawkeye, I'm like, that's strange, but okay. Because like I thought he was like super serious dude, and apparently he was, and he was kind of a bummer. But then they finally got to this show which actually let him do the stuff he's good at, which is emoting, which is being dramatic, which is also being okay at being a curmudgeon instead of action scenes and flexing. And although there are quips, it's less about that. It's about him interacting as a character with other characters. It's a better vessel for him than the Avengers movies, to be honest.
Right. And I would say that he often kind of plays, I think in this film, the straight man. To a lot of other people's quippy, fun, especially Kate Bishop, but even other people. Like, he is the guy that's just kind of like, okay, make your jokes. And that worked.
Yeah.
It was, much better than it did in any of the Avengers movies, I would say.
Yes.
I will say that this is another instance where, like, I watched this, and not to say that I dislike Marvel movies, right? Marvel movies are great, right? I enjoy them. I mean, they're fine. But I'm more excited about seeing the shows based on content like this than I am on, say, seeing another movie. Not to say I'm not going to go see the movies, but like as of this recording, I've not seen the Eternals yet. And while I will see it, all 17 hours of it, I'm not like, and there are things I'm excited about. What I will say is I just, these TV shows to me are where I'm finding I'm enjoying Marvel stuff more.
And I should say, like, that's not just because of this show. I think that's indicative of all the Marvel shows that they've aired on Disney Plus, from the strange experiment and beautiful experiment that was WandaVision to the straight up like Marvel movie TV show of Falcon and Winter Soldier, to the philosophical and straight up introduction of the multiverse of Loki. And I guess you can kind of pair that with What If. To this sort of,
you struggle through mentioning What If, why don't you?
I don't like that show. I'm sorry. I also have problems with multiverses, but that's just me as a viewer, not a problem with the concept. And then just this wonderful sort of like street level drama comedy of Hawkeye, like it's taking the stuff that you have admittedly loved most about the Marvel movies, which isn't necessarily the continuity. It's like the genre mashups. Especially with Captain Marvel, like not Captain Marvel, sorry, the other Captain, Captain America. What they learned pretty quickly was like, let's make each movie a different thing instead of like an iteration on necessarily the story that came before, right? It's not a sequel as much as it's like another Captain America movie, kind of like Indiana Jones, where it's like they're not sequels, they are just, here's another installment of the Indiana Jones story, right? Or here's another Indiana Jones story, not another segment of it.
Well, and this is the thing I talk about, like with Ant-Man, where it was a comedy heist movie that was a Marvel movie, and I remember that, like, that was something I thought was great, and I was actually kind of like, oh, this, we always talk, I think most people will say that Winter Soldier was the first time where it's like, okay, this is kind of like a spy espionage movie.
Yes. But
it's a Marvel movie. And it definitely had a lot of Marvel to it. But like, that's where you start to really see them trying to like, okay, we need to make different types of movies within our milieu, rather than just keep recycling the same structure format, just like, Shang-Chi it's a kung fu action movie, right? Like
Captain America 3, they're like, what if we made an Avengers movie?
Yeah, well, okay. Sometimes it's
Iron Man 2, what if we made a bad movie? And they're like, you know what?
They really wanted to push the
Thor 2, what if we made an even worse movie?
That's a distinct call right there. I mean, Thor 2 worse than Iron Man 2?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think, like, you get my point that they definitely, and they're doing much more so now, right? These shows, almost like they don't, They're no longer threatened by, I don't know, bad box office or whatever, or they're not, or they realize that we can give more creative freedom. Maybe I don't know what the cost of these are. I don't know if they're cheaper, more expensive.
I guess it depends on the story, right? I'm guessing Hawkeye was fairly cost amenable because it's just people shooting at each other in New York City.
I don't know, right? It could have been. And so in that case, like, yeah, let's go and do Die Hard, the Marvel series. You know, may have a thing that's themed about action and Christmas. But, you know, and I'm to the point where now, like, I'll admit, we're now at the end of the first, like, run of Marvel Disney Plus shows. And I'm actually
Disney Plus Phase 1.
I'm actually like, oh, what's next? And someone's like, oh, this movie. I'm like, no, what's next? Like,
the real Marvel.
Right? Like, and that's actually that's the thing. It is the real Marvel. And I'm like, oh, can we not?
Like, honestly, like I was going to make a tweet, but I realized I just get nothing but hate. I'm like, let's just cancel all Marvel movies and make another season of Hawkeye, please, Jesus, please.
Well,
please.
And here's my beat, my take, right? Is I would argue that yes, sometimes movies are appropriate, but I would argue that I think these shows can do a lot better with the stories they seem to want to tell. I could be wrong. I don't know what Marvel's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is going to be, and I'll watch it some point. But you know, like that sounds like that could be a show,
right?
Or something like it. You know, or some of these other things they want to do. That could be a show. I don't know. I guess I just like even if it's just 6 episodes at 30 minutes long each. You know, which is just a 3-hour movie, right? Even if that's all it is, I still feel like I think I like that format better. Because
I think it gets to the heart of what Marvel does well with the superhero movies, which is character. I think part of what made the early Marvel movies stand out most, and I'm not disparaging the follow-up Marvel movies, but I think the follow-up, like the phase, I don't know, what phase are we in, Andrew?
I think they're in phase 4 now?
Sure.
5?
One of the things I've complained about is that the reliance on continuity, and like, especially to its detriment, especially with the introduction of the Disney Plus shows. I saw the trailer to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and I got like upset. It's like, even though, because there's a clear moment in that trailer where it's like, oh, you need to have watched WandaVision. And that's a big ask, because it's a weird show for one. It's on a proprietary streaming service for 2, and that's a big ask. And I'm like, well, that's dumb. I want a good movie, not a good chapter 4 of 72 that we're telling. But I don't mean to write off the movie, but I'm like, but they're leaning into that in the trailer, which means they could be leaning into that even more in the film. So it put me off a little bit.
Or not, or right, like, or it could just be that's actually like, you know, a small part of the movie, but
maybe, but to make a distinct choice to put that in the trailer was a choice.
Right.
I'd say my biggest criticism with sort of the latter, let's just say half of Marvel movies, is that there is a dependence on previous continuity. Like, oh, you're here because you saw the other ones. To an extent, I think the early Marvel movies were much more just about the characters and like, what are they going through? I think that really maybe kind of topped off at maybe Iron Man 3. After that, it's like, okay, now this is all building towards something, even though they were doing that before. But I think the Disney Plus shows are kind of getting back to that original ethos, for lack of a better word, and like, oh, let's just explore these characters, and which is the approach that got all the fans in the first place. And so it's not surprising for me to hear you go like, how about more of this? Because this is what made me a fan, right?
Well, and the one thing I will say is that I don't have as much a problem when the shows expect you to have seen other stuff.
Right.
Because, right, that's shows, right? I live in a world where we had Supernatural of 15 seasons, where you'd be like, previously on Supernatural, and they'd reference something that happened a decade ago.
Right. But they're not like, oh, you have to, but I'm talking more about like this DCCW stuff, where it's like, you need to watch all these other TV shows, these other disparate shows now.
Well, I think the beef there is also they drag that shit on too long. Whereas, like, I actually think, like, when you have a 6-episode show that's on the same subscriber network as the other 6-episode show, and right. I mean, you don't have to watch it, right? They can give you little snippets and stuff. That is that thing whereas, like, you're right, going to a movie, it would be a very different experience to say, hey, here's this new Doctor Strange movie. By the way, have you seen these 2 shows plus these 4 movies? Like, well, that seems a bit much. Whereas like if it's all just shows on the network or a movie on the network, I don't think that's as big an ask, because like you could just, flip over and watch that movie, or they can give you like what is it? Witcher season 2 just came out. And they had, I think someone said they had like 3 different previously ons you could watch. There was like the 5-minute version, the 20-minute version, and then like the short version. Right. Because quite frankly, if you saw Witcher season 1, doesn't matter. You don't remember shit. Right? But they can do that because it's all on Netflix. Whereas you can't go to the theater and say, oh, some of you guys need to watch the 30-minute previously on.
But that's too much of an ask.
Well, and that's why I think the shows on these streamings I think that's the way to do it, because if you don't need to watch it, you don't have to. If you've never seen this, you can watch with the 30-minute or the 20-minute, here's what you need to know. And that doesn't bother me.
That's too big of an ask, though. Like, I have an unnatural ability to remember stupid nerd shit because it's just my brain. But I do live with someone that isn't into the continuity, but enjoys these movies, enjoys these shows for what they are. But an hour episode of every show we watch turns into an hour and a half. I'm not complaining, because we have to either we're talking about what's the sort of thematic implications of what's going on, which is fun, or it's me answering questions like, wait, so what are they referring to? Now, yes, they do have, we could watch this previously on stuff, but she doesn't care enough to watch a 30-minute previously on stuff, or 20, or even 10-minute. That's too much. That's too much, because I just want to watch a TV show. I'm not joining a cult. And it's like, this is a problem not just with Marvel. This is a problem with a lot of entertainment. The one thing I liked about Hawkeye is that, yeah, they even did a bigger ask in some sense of the word, which is like, did you see Daredevil on Netflix? Because we got a surprise for you, right? Or did you watch Black Widow? But honestly, the writers did a really strong job of not, like, if you know, you know, but it doesn't matter. I don't think the show hinged on you knowing what Kingpin had done during seasons 1 through 3 of Daredevil. They didn't hinge on necessarily you knowing on Yelena's story was, because in the episode, in the show, they gave you all the explanation you needed to know. I think the only thing you needed to really know before Hawkeye was Clint's relationship with Black Widow, right? And basically all they're really referring to is the first Avengers movie and Endgame, which is a weird 2 movies to watch if you haven't watched anything else before.
Well, and I think in general, a lot of these things, like, I would be stunned if Doctor Strange doesn't do the same thing. Right.
I hope
like,
so. Yeah.
I
think on movies, though, they might rely more on previous knowledge than the TV shows. I'll give you that.
I don't know. I don't know. I would say, if anything, that's a danger. Like, I think the TV shows can rely on it more because, again, it's not really much to ask someone to just watch the other, because, really, at the end of the day, MCU is just one big series, right? And quite frankly, right now, after 4 or 5 shows, there's still less than 1 season of a CW show.
Right.
I don't know. I don't think that's, it's not a big ask, but it's also like not the end of the world. Whereas for a movie, if it's so hard to watch Doctor Strange, if you haven't seen WandaVision and Doctor Strange 1, I guess you could accept, and you haven't seen Endgame and you haven't seen whatever, I just can't imagine they'd make that movie. Because most of the Marvel movies kind of assume, I saw Iron Man 3. And that movie entirely hinges on having seen Avengers.
Absolutely.
I had not seen Avengers. I had no idea what happened in Avengers. I didn't need to. They made it very clear.
You haven't seen Avengers?
No, I didn't see Avengers because it came out within 6 months. I didn't see Avengers until 2 or 3 years after it came out. I didn't see it until right before Avengers 2. Although I did briefly see 5 minutes of it on an airplane once. But I didn't see it in the theater because it came out in 2010, 2011. And actually, my roommates at the time hated it. So I just thought, I'm not going to go see it. And also, I didn't care.
Hated Avengers.
I didn't see Thor in the theater. I didn't see Avengers in the theater. I only saw Iron Man 3 because it was someone just said, "Do you want to go to the theater?" I'm like, okay. The only thing I went out of my way to see was Captain fucking America, the second one.
You know what the hottest take is?
What?
We both like Iron Man 3.
Yeah, no, that was a fun. And that's things I liked it. I was like, it was pretty good. Better than Iron Man 2.
Take we can have here. That's the most controversial take we can have here.
Hey man, if you didn't like Iron Man 3, I don't know what's wrong with you. That movie was fun. It was because it was. I get it. It wasn't about Iron Man. It was about Tony Stark. But again, that's fine.
Which is what we're in. We're talking about a show that's about Clint Barton, not necessarily about him being an Avenger, although that's part of it. Like, yeah, of course. Which leads me to kind of like the one thing I want to talk about. So I have a subscription, mostly because I forgot to cancel it, to Marvel Unlimited. a mobile app that it's also a desktop app where you can read selected items from Marvel's comic book archives, and it's a huge selection. I'm not going to say it's piecemeal, but there's a lot of stuff that's not on there. I just don't want to say that's like, oh, you can look at anything. And I have been reading the Hawkeye run by Matt Fraction and David Aja, and I'm even more convinced now in the effort to have these creators listed in the opening credits of the show. Because like it's the world and the style that those two created, right? The writer and the artist. Not only obviously the basic general kind of story of it being a street level Clint Barton story with Kate Bishop, but also like what they call in the book the tracksuit mafia, that how they communicate completely in the word bro is from this comic, as well as a lot of like straight up dialogue from this comic. It's in the like the thumbprint is all over this show. The thumbprint of that comic is all over this show. It's a crying shame that they didn't more publicly acknowledge, and that's separate from all the visual elements they were pulling from the comic, which we talked about on a previous episode, with their advertising and the opening credits and the show itself. And it's very good. I recommend the comic wholeheartedly, and but it is very different from the show in its own right because it's not based on the Avengers movie series, right? It's not based on the MCU, so it's got its own continuity it's dealing with. It's an admirable adaptation to make it fit the MCU while also retaining the grounded, personable, and character-based story that they were telling in that run. And I'm excited, especially now with the show being over. I'm excited to keep reading the comic run and continuing to be able to experience stories with these characters. I guess aside from that, the one thing I wanted to address is disability as it's presented in the show, because I think it's a little complicated. I feel like, and I'd like to hear your thoughts about it, because I think they do address his hearing loss and deafness being an integral part of the show for not just Clint but other characters as well, specifically Echo. But I feel like they kind of dropped the ball at the end, like in the last couple episodes. It doesn't play. I feel like they kind of forget about his hearing loss.
Well, I mean, it is one of those things where, well, he has a hearing aid. Although like at the front end of the show, they make a point of, him doing that thing of like facing the good ear, if you will, towards his kids and stuff like that. Whereas, after there's I think in the third episode where his hearing aid is broken, right?
Right.
And he goes through the process of fixing it. And I think after that, it fades into the background because, although Echo does not, right? And her,
right, that's true.
Because she is actually, I think she's just deaf. She's not. It's not a hearing. It's like she is deaf. I don't want to say just deaf. She is deaf, and so she communicates, through sign. I think for the entirety of the show, and other people with her to various capacities, including Kingpin, including her friend, tracksuit McBad guy. So it's not as much a focus of the show. I think there's an interesting part where she kind of challenges Hawkeye about it.
She dresses down, yeah.
The idea that he's like not because he has the hearing aid, because he's not just accepting, his disability. But I don't know. I mean, could they have done more? Well, certainly. I almost wonder if really this was just an excuse to get the character of Echo in the kind of like the front and center, and then to make a show about her. Because again, they'd announced that she had a show before she appeared in Hawkeye.
And you know what? You bring up a good point, because I think they introduce it with Clint in the show, but the sort of advocacy is taken over by Echo's character, and Clint's ongoing. It's not issue at all. Actually, it takes a second seat to whatever his story with him and Kate, and Echo takes that. It takes over the that kind of advocacy, and it does so in a much more effective way in a sense, and makes a much more complex situation, especially with her and Wilson Fisk, because it's clear that he not only raised her like a daughter, but that's proven with him having learned sign, or ASL specifically.
At least to a certain extent. Like it's clear he knows enough to communicate with her. And for context, the character Echo is actually basically in several comics is is Wilson Fisk's daughter, or at least adoptive daughter. So this idea that this would that's kind of how it worked out makes sense.
And to that extent, I think they do a good job actually taking the baton from Barton and carrying it further in a much more interesting and earnest and honest way with Echo, to the point where I'm really kind of interested to see what they do with her show going forward. And I think I heard that for her show they hired, I'd have to fact check this. They hired writers from Daredevil, the Netflix show, and I want to say Iron Fist, the Netflix show. They hired writers from the Netflix show to work on her upcoming show. So, and that's not a bad thing, I would say. So, except that might indicate that it's going to be super dark and sad, but
right. Although, I mean, but the one thing I will say, it's interesting to me that the way they introduced Kingpin was and I think we talked a little bit earlier, was the family friendly version.
Yeah.
And I imagine that, even if they had the people that wrote these, some of the Netflix, the Martflix shows, it would still be like they'd have to tone it down to the family friendly version.
Right. I mean, even into how they were alluding to him before he was introduced, they called him the big guy. That's like that's like what an uncle calls his nephew. Hey, big guy. It was definitely a different Kingpin, but as we talked about, still very much the same. And we know, spoilers. Sure, I'll just jump into it. We know that the MCU has introduced at least one other Martflix character into the MCU proper.
Not that either of us would know.
No, of course not.
Because it's a movie that hasn't come out yet.
Right.
Spider-Man.
To us, everybody, yeah.
Spider-Man.
No Way Home.
No Way Home? Is that what it's called?
That is what it's called.
Hasn't come out yet, but I'm told that when it does come out, Charlie Cox will be in it. Not as Daredevil, but as Matt Murdock.
Indeed. It seems like they might have plans with those Martflix shows in some capacity. And you know what? That'd be great. I think the casting in those shows was fantastic. I mean, we can forget about Iron Fist. Yeah, I mean.
And what I will actually say is I think what they did with Kingpin, in terms of like it's the same character. We don't necessarily see the grimdark version, but it's okay. It's still the same character, right?
Yeah.
Some people may, there's nitpickers that are going to nitpick. Fine, but for me, that felt like, what would this character be like in a bright MCU show as opposed to the grimdark Netflix show?
Right.
So I can imagine the other characters also appearing. Not all of them, right? Some of them it's going to be hard, right? I'm sorry, I cannot imagine David Tennant being in an MCU show or movie. Like, I just don't. Like, I'm sorry. His theme was rape. That doesn't really fit with the bright light aesthetic. And even Jessica Jones will be like, okay, you have to have her be the tough and gritty, and don't ever really talk about why she's got a dark past.
Right. Just say that she has one. Kind of go as deep as they went with Black Widow in Age of Ultron, for example. Like, bad things happened to me, yeah.
Or what was the line in Winter Soldier? I have a lot of red in my journal. Sure.
Red in my ledger, yeah. But they can do it. I'd love to see it. Those are great. And I was sad for all those people when their shows got canceled. It'd be great if Marvel picked them up. But wishes are fishes and all that kind of stuff. Generally speaking, Hawkeye is good. I don't want to engage in like fanboy speculation of like, where does Hawkeye go from here? I don't particularly care. I'm glad we got a really good show that actually gave us an angle on this character that we otherwise didn't, care about, and elevated not only that character, but I think a lot of the MCU in general because of it.
Yeah.
If this is what they're doing, I'm all for it. But I personally am a little worried with the multiverse introduction. I'm like, are they going to be going away from this to more just, timey-wimey, spacey-wacy bullshit?
Well, I don't think so. I think it's just an opportunity to mix and match some characters in different ways. Because I mean, it's clear, right? They're setting the stage for new characters. It's just that some of them they have to go farther to get.
So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can also find us on other social media, such as Twitter and Instagram. On Twitter, you can find us at our respective handles, which means you can find Andrew at Profound Dark, and you can find me at dbethel. You can also find us on Instagram, where you can find Andrew at Profound Brick, and me and my work at dbethel Comics.
While you're at our website at forallintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page by clicking on the link in the corner that says YouTube. There you'll find YouTube.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4, and they're both written and performed by Kevin McLeod, the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 by attribution license.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use, whether it's something like the Apple Podcast app or Spotify. What would help us out even more, though, would be to leave some sort of review, whether a text review or using the proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. Man, Andrew, although our listeners won't notice because we are wizards at editing and presentation, but man, we had some technical difficulties today during the show. So if this feels a little abbreviated, it's because we're worried about shit falling apart.
What's funny is it's probably not going to be abbreviated. Everyone's going to think it sounds fine. It's
right.
Like, oh, but let me tell you, it was done fucked up.
It was a, you know what? Welcome to 2022. Shit's broke.
I feel like it's like, how do we even tell people like, oh, this episode had issues? Let's just say took a bit longer than normal and had some hiccups along the way.
I'm glad it had issues because we were talking about comic book properties, Andrew. Oh, bullshit technology. I still got my sense of humor, and it's bad.
I was gonna say, you don't. What do those students say in their reviews?
Oh, his jokes are hilarious, even if they sometimes don't make sense. That was an honest review a student gave my university about my teaching. So, until you develop a good sense of humor, dear listeners, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
You're listening to The 14th Source for all geeky nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am Dan... Whoa. I revealed too much. Wow. Don't dox me, yo. And yet, at 58, not only is she more fit than I am at 41, she's more fit than I was at 25.
than I've ever been.
Right?
You know, like we see every flavor of shit.
Oh, and Jesus. They all that's a phrasing that you should never say out loud.
You know,
which would be a great podcast title, but I'm not going to do it. I've seen you in pictures doing the Dance Dance Go Go machine. What's it called? Dance Dance Revolution. There we go.
Dance Dance Go Go. I am still recording. Hope this is really good. I'm still recording. Mighty Morphin Power recording.